I want you to picture a really specific scenario.
Okay.
It's a Tuesday afternoon. Maybe you're at work, or maybe you're just at a family gathering, and you get pulled into a conversation.
Right.
It starts normal enough,
Yeah.
but 10 minutes later, you walk away feeling like you've been spun in a centrifuge.
Yeah.
You're exhausted, you're defensive, and you have this nagging feeling that you just admitted to a crime you didn't even commit.
That is such a universal experience. I mean, it's that sensation of the ground moving under your feet while you're just standing completely still.
Exactly. And the worst part is the hangover.
Oh, the mental hangover.
Yes. You spend the next 3 hours replaying the whole conversation in the shower, thinking if I had just said this, or if I had just explained my intention better, they would have understood.
Right.
We just obsess over finding the perfect combination of words to somehow unlock their empathy.
Which is a totally natural instinct. I mean, we want to be understood, but that instinct is exactly what gets us in trouble.
Right. And that brings us to today's deep dive. We are looking at a really provocative source today. It's titled The Machiavellian Art of Silent Sovereignty. Now, I have to admit, when I first saw the title, I bristled a little bit.
Sure.
Because Machiavellian usually implies we're about to learn how to, stab someone in the back or poison a chalice.
It definitely has a branding problem. When we hear Machiavelli, we immediately think of the prince.
Right. Manipulation, scheming, the ends justify the means.
Yeah, it feels very aggressive.
Exactly. And I don't think you, our listeners, are looking to become villains. So why are we looking at this specific text?
Because this text argues that Machiavelli's genius wasn't just in teaching princes how to attack, it was in his understanding of the basic physics of power. So this isn't a manual on how to manipulate others. It's a manual on counterintelligence. It's about understanding how power operates so you can actually stop being manipulated.
So it's like defensive driving for conversation.
That is a perfect way to put it. The core premise here is that the people who drain you, whether that's a narcissistic boss, a toxic family member, or just a really high conflict friend, they have a structural weakness.
A fatal flaw.
A fatal flaw in their operating system.
And according to the source, that flaw is related to silence.
It is. The text opens with this really bold assertion. A manipulator is not an engine. They are a mirror.
They can't generate power on their own.
Exactly. They require your input. They literally need your reactions, your explanations, your emotional outbursts to function. Without your words, they have absolutely no raw material to work with.
Okay, I hear that. And logically, sure, it makes sense. But let's be real for a second.
Yeah.
When you are in the room with someone who is actively twisting your words or accusing you of something crazy, the urge to speak isn't just a choice. It feels like a literal survival instinct.
It does.
It feels dangerous to stay quiet.
You're hitting on something crucial there, that feeling of danger. That is the weapon. The source actually calls this the nervous system hijack.
Hijack implies they're literally taking control of the vehicle.
They are taking the wheel. Because a skilled manipulator doesn't fight you with logic. If you try to debate them with facts, you will lose. Because they aren't playing for truth.
They're playing for a reaction.
They are fighting your nervous system. They target specific triggers. Usually it's the fear of being seen as bad or uncaring or incompetent. They poke that specific nerve, and your amygdala, the threat center of your brain, just lights up.
So that tightness in my chest, the racing heart, the feeling that I absolutely must correct the record right now, that is the hijack.
That is your body preparing for a biological threat. And the manipulator is banking on the fact that you will try to relieve that physical tension by speaking.
By explaining.
By explaining. By defending yourself.
But why is defending myself the wrong move? If I'm innocent, shouldn't I say so?
In a healthy dynamic, yes, absolutely. In a manipulative one, absolutely not.
Okay, why?
The source uses this great analogy of the dance or the rhythm. Manipulation is a kinetic process. They step forward, you step back. They provoke, you explain.
They accuse, I justify. It's action and reaction.
Exactly. And as long as you are reacting, you are validating their reality. You are participating in the rhythm they set. Even if you are shouting at the top of your lungs, "You're wrong!" you're still dancing.
So silence isn't just about not making noise. It's about breaking the beat.
Right. Imagine you're tangoing with someone and suddenly you just go dead weight. You just stop moving entirely. You stop responding to their physical cues. What happens?
The dance collapses. I mean, they look ridiculous flailing around trying to dip someone who won't even move.
Precisely. Silence acts as a circuit breaker. It forces the manipulator to be the only one moving, which immediately makes them look unstable. But to pull this off, you really have to understand a concept the source calls strategic obscurity.
Strategic obscurity. I actually highlighted this section in my notes because it sounds so almost cold, like military doctrine.
Yeah. It is highly tactical. Think about it this way. In a war, you don't broadcast your troop movements to the enemy.
Right.
But in our personal relationships, especially the really difficult ones, we do this constantly. The text uses the metaphor of the map.
The map. Okay, walk us through this.
Every time you explain yourself, every time you say something like, I did this because I was feeling insecure, or I didn't mean to upset you, I was just so tired, you are handing the other person a highly detailed topographic map of your psyche.
You're showing them exactly where the buttons are.
You are showing them the buttons, the landmines, the weak points in your fence. You are giving them the exact coordinates for your emotional triggers. And the tragedy is, we usually think we are generating empathy by sharing this.
We think if I show them I'm hurting, they'll stop.
But the manipulator uses that data against you. They file it away. They think, oh, she feels guilty when she thinks she's being selfish. Great, good to know. I can use that next Tuesday. Strategic obscurity is the discipline of withholding that map. It's not lying. It's not deception. It is simply the refusal to be transparent in a hostile environment.
I can hear a listener objection here, though.
Let's hear it.
Is that dishonest? If I'm feeling something, isn't it more authentic to just share it? We are constantly told that vulnerability is a strength.
Vulnerability is a strength, but only in a safe environment. The source makes a really sharp distinction here. Vulnerability without boundaries is just self-destruction.
Vulnerability without boundaries is self-destruction. That's powerful.
If you are in a negotiation with a shark, you don't bleed in the water just to show them how human you are.
Okay, that completely puts it in perspective. So strategic obscurity is really about recognizing when you are in shark-infested waters.
Exactly. It's about denying the data. When you offer no data, no anger, no tears, no frantic defenses, you create a void. And the source argues that manipulators are utterly terrified of voids.
Why are they terrified? Wouldn't they just use the silence to trample all over you?
They can't, because their control is entirely based on prediction. They think if I insult his work, he's going to get defensive. Or if I guilt trip her about the kids, she will apologize.
But if they push the button and you do nothing,
the machine breaks. They don't know if you're afraid, if you're just bored, or if you're secretly plotting their demise.
the uncertainty freaks them out.
It consumes them. They have to fill that void with their own anxiety.
But let's talk about the actual difficulty of doing this in real life. Because there is a huge psychological hurdle the text mentions, and it's called the illusion of obligation.
Yes. This is the lock you have to pick if you want to be free of this.
It's that deep-seated belief that when someone asks you a question, you inherently owe them an answer.
It's pure social conditioning. From the time we are toddlers, we are taught, look at me when I'm talking to you, answer me when I ask you a question. We are trained to believe that silence is rude, and that a direct question demands a direct response.
So when a manipulator asks, why would you do something so stupid? Our brain immediately goes, question detected. Must formulate answer.
Exactly. The manipulator hacks that social contract. They use the format of a question not to get information from you, but to enforce a debt. They position themselves as the judge and you as the defendant.
And the defendant has to answer the judge.
Always.
I hate how accurate that is. You really do feel like you're on trial.
But the text reminds us of something vital. You are not on trial. You are a sovereign entity. And this leads to the visualization of locking the warehouse.
I loved this image from the source. It frames your thoughts and your feelings as actual inventory.
Yes. Picture your mind as a warehouse full of valuable goods. Your memories, your vulnerabilities, your logic, your personal truth. When you engage in these defensive arguments, you are essentially throwing open the loading dock doors and saying, come on in and take whatever you need.
And they don't take it to appreciate it. They take it to weaponize it.
Right. They grab your words, reshape them, and fire them right back at you. They'll say, but last week you said you were fine with this.
Oh, the classic trap.
Locking the warehouse means realizing, I do not owe you access to my supply. Silence isn't rudeness in this context. It's border control.
But here's where I get stuck, and I think a lot of people do. We have this persistent fantasy that if we just clear the air, everything will be okay.
The clearing the air myth.
Yeah, we think this is just a big misunderstanding. If I can just explain it properly, we can go back to being friends or partners or just happy.
That hope is the most dangerous thing in the room. And we need to be very clear on this distinction. In a healthy relationship, clearing the air builds bridge.
But in a manipulative dynamic.
In a manipulative dynamic, clearing the air builds a target.
Why? Why is it a target?
Because the source states bluntly that the manipulator does not want to understand you. They are not looking for clarity. They're looking for leverage.
That's rough.
When you try to clear the air, you are essentially providing them with more surface area to attack. You are just handing them more threads to pull.
That is a really bitter pill to swallow. It means accepting that the relationship fundamentally isn't what you thought it was.
It does. It requires grieving the relationship you wish you had so you can actually survive the relationship you really have.
So let's say I actually do this. I lock the warehouse. I stop the dance. I go completely silent. Does the manipulator just shrug and walk away?
I wish it were that easy. No. If you change the physics of the relationship, the other person is going to react to that change. And usually they react with what the source in behavioral psychology calls the extinction burst.
The extinction burst. That sounds intense.
It is. Think of a vending machine. You put your dollar in, you press the button, you get a soda. That's the established pattern. You do this every day for a year.
Okay.
Now imagine one day you put the dollar in, press the button, and nothing happens. What do?
I press it again? Maybe harder.
Right. You don't just say, oh, well, and pleasantly walk away. You press it repeatedly. You shake the heavy machine. You might even kick it. That sudden spike in aggressive behavior, precisely because the expected reward didn't come, that is the extinction burst.
So the manipulator is the guy kicking the vending machine, and I'm the machine.
You are the machine that stopped dispensing the soda. And the soda was your reaction, your defense, your apology, your drama. When you cut that off, they will escalate.
What does that escalation actually look like?
It gets louder, it gets sharper. The source warns that they will say things specifically designed to hurt you just to get a gasp.
Just to get any reaction to that.
Any reaction. They might insult your core character. They'll say things like, I guess you just don't care about this family, or you've become so incredibly cold, or everyone thinks you're crazy.
Ouch. Those are the serious button pushers.
They are checking to see if the buttons still work. They are absolutely desperate for that old rhythm.
And if I stay silent through all the kicking and screaming, if I just let them tantrum.
Then you force them into the second outcome, exposure.
Exposure, meaning they expose themselves.
Yes. Without your participation to muddy the waters, their behavior stands completely alone. It becomes stark. If you are screaming insults at someone who is just sitting there calmly drinking coffee who looks like the problem.
The screamer, obviously.
Exactly. Silence acts as a high-definition mirror. It reflects their chaos right back at them without your frantic defense mechanism blurring the image. And they hate it. Which brings us to the concept of the frame.
Okay, the frame. I've heard this term in sociology. How does it apply to this dynamic?
The frame is the invisible context of an interaction. It dictates the unwritten rules. Who is the authority? Who is the supplicant? The source argues that the frame always belongs to the person who is not explaining themselves.
Wait, really? I always felt like the person asking the sharp questions held the power.
They do, unless you refuse to answer. Think about an interrogation room. The detective asks the questions, the suspect explains, the detective holds the frame. But if the suspect just stays silent...
The detective starts sweating.
Yes. The detective has to try harder. The detective gets frustrated. The frame starts to shift.
So when I rush to fill an awkward silence because it feels uncomfortable, I'm actually conceding the frame.
You are telling them, this tension is my responsibility to fix. When you let the silence sit, you are saying, this is your tension, you sit in it.
That creates a lot of pressure.
Immense pressure. And manipulators absolutely hate pressure they don't control.
I have to ask a difficult question here, though, because I know people listening are thinking it. We hear a lot nowadays about the silent treatment being a form of emotional abuse.
Me too.
Narcissists use it to punish their victims. So by doing this, by becoming the silent sovereign, aren't we just becoming the abuser?
That is a critical distinction to make. And the source actually addresses this head on because it is the manipulator's favorite counterattack. When you go silent, they will immediately accuse you of stonewalling or being abusive.
So I'll say, you're being passive-aggressive. You're freezing me out.
Here is the fundamental difference. Intent. The silent treatment is punitive. It is an offensive tactic. It is used to punish someone into submission. I won't talk to you until you do what I want.
Okay. And strategic silence.
Strategic silence is protective. It is defensive. It is used to stop an attack that is already in progress.
So it's the difference between locking someone in a dungeon versus locking your own front door to keep an intruder out.
So it's a perfect analogy. You aren't trying to hurt them. You are refusing to be hurt. You are simply closing the border.
But the temptation to open that door and shout, "I'm not being abusive, I'm just trying to protect myself," is so strong.
And the very moment you do that,
I've explained myself, I've stepped right back into the dance.
and they have the frame again. They successfully baited you into defending your method of defense. It's a trap within a trap.
It's incredibly insidious. It really feels like you need to be a Zen master or some cold-hearted spy to pull this off. Do I need special training for this?
That's actually the most encouraging part of the source material. It explicitly states that no special skills are required. You don't need a high IQ. You don't need to be a master debater. You don't even need confidence.
Then what do I need?
Discipline. Pure, simple discipline. It is the discipline of non-reaction. It's the ability to feel that burning urge to set the record straight, that huge cortisol spike, and choose to do absolutely nothing.
It's impulse control.
It is. The source frames this in economic terms. Machiavelli understood better than anyone that people follow incentives, profit and loss.
Okay, break down the economics of an argument for me.
For a manipulator, your reaction is the profit. The drama, the emotional offloading, the sheer sense of control that is their payout. When you engage, you are funding their behavior. You are making it profitable for them to treat you badly.
And silence bankrupts them.
Silence makes the transaction costly. Now they are expending all this energy, yelling, planning, maneuvering, and getting zero return. No emotional payout, no control. If you do that long enough, the behavior stops.
Not because they had some grand spiritual awakening.
No, because the strategy is simply no longer profitable. They are pragmatic predators. If the hunting ground is empty, they move on.
You're cutting off the funding.
Exactly.
This really shifts my perspective on what it means to win an argument. I think I've always defined winning as having the last word, or somehow getting the other person to finally admit they were wrong.
Which, let's be honest, almost never happens with these personality types.
Never. I mean, I've waited years for apologies that just never came.
Yeah. So this completely redefines winning. Winning isn't conquering the other person. Winning is remaining sovereign. Winning is keeping your inventory safely in the warehouse. Winning is not needing to have a word at all. The source puts it beautifully. It says, the manipulator's power was never theirs to begin with. It was borrowed.
Borrowed from where?
From your compliance, from your participation. It's just like the Wizard of Oz. The giant, scary, floating head is only scary as long as you look at the head. The moment you look behind the curtain, or in this case, the moment you cut the power cord, it's just a confused person pulling levers.
And silence is cutting the cord.
Silence is the only pair of scissors that works.
I want to ask one practical question before we wrap up today. We've talked a lot about how this works in the heat of the moment. But does this actually change the relationship long term, or is this just a Band-Aid?
It changes the fundamental structure of the relationship. When you consistently practice this, not just once as a trick, but as a discipline, you retrain the people around you. You teach them, this tactic does not work on me.
You become a bad target.
You become a boring target. And manipulators hate boredom. They crave high-definition emotion. If you just give them static, they will either adjust their behavior to treat you with respect because they can't get away with the nonsense, or, and frankly, this is often the best outcome, they will just move on to someone else.
They go find a vending machine that still dispenses the soda.
Exactly. And that is a form of victory, too.
This has been a heavy, deep dive, but a really freeing one. I think the biggest takeaway for me is letting go of the need to be understood by people who are committed to misunderstanding me.
That's the key. Stop trying to sell the truth to someone who just isn't buying.
So, here's the challenge for you, our listeners, today. We tend to think of silence as empty space. We think of it as passive, or something that happens when we just run out of things to say. But I want you to reframe that.
Think of silence as an object, a heavy, solid object.
Exactly. What if silence is actually the loudest message you can possibly send? A message that says, you have no access here. My warehouse is locked. If the frame truly belongs to the one who doesn't explain, I want you to look at your life this week. Where are you over-explaining away your own power?
And more importantly, who are you handing the map to?
That's something to think about. That's it for this deep dive. Stay sovereign, everyone.